Hello and welcome to episode 24 of the Dumb Money Show. I'm here with your co-host Ali Suleiman, and today what are we talking about, bro?
Bro, again, today we're coming with you with another guest for our listeners. We hope our listeners and viewers have had a great week between our episodes. But here with a professional guest, Mohamad Jaber. Mohamad is a seasoned finance professional with a rich background in economics as well as credit analysis. He holds a degree in economics from the Lebanese University. And he began his career in Lebanon, where he further honed his analytical skills over 4 years as a credit analyst. His expertise for finance soon led him to the United Kingdom, where he joined a prominent Gulf bank in London. And in his current role, Mohammed is an associate director at Fitch Ratings, one of the world's leading credit rating agencies. In this role, he covers a diverse portfolio of financial institutions across the EMEA region. So, without further ado, it would be great to welcome Mohammed onto the podcast. Mohammed, how are you?
Hi guys, thanks for having me. Yeah, I'm all good. What about you?
Yeah, all good. We're thrilled to have you on today's episode. It'll be quite interesting to see, your whole career, and it's quite good credentials you have there. Being associate director at one of the best, rating agencies.
Absolutely. To kind of talk about the structure we'll go into for our listeners, it never really strays from the usual. We like to stay consistent. We'll start with Mohammed's educational background, as I touched on, then his career and start in finance, explaining his current field, and then onto the main bulk of the episode, his current role, where we'll break down as much as we can his day-to-day, his roles, his responsibilities, his favorite moments, his not so favorite moments, and everything in between, all the nuances. And then we'll finish off with some brief tips for students as well, just like we always do.
Yeah. So without further ado, let's just get into it, starting off with your educational/young background. So did your choices in early education reflect your degree choices, or was it more of a variety?
Yeah, so when I up until high school, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I was thinking about maybe going into medicine, maybe going into engineering. So I had a lot of options in front of me. But in Lebanon, the system is a bit different. So at the end of high school, you have to choose a specific, kind of like how you have here, A levels, I guess. So you have to choose a specific degree path that you could start on. So you could either start on economics and sociology, you could start on literature or life sciences, as they call it, or something related to mathematics where you go on and do engineering. And I hadn't really been that focused in high school up until that moment. So the options that I had were either going into literature or going into economics because it's how it's structured in Lebanon. So I was kind of pushed into choosing economics, not really knowing what it was or what it involved. But as soon as I started studying that in high school, I realized, okay, this is something that I really like. And because I really enjoyed it, I started actually putting in the effort. So the more I put effort, the more that I understood more. And then I realized, okay, I want to do this when I go to university. So I did that in high school, finished, and then started university, majored in economics as well. And in Lebanon, the university system is a bit competitive. So there was a lot of studying to get to the university that I wanted to get to. Yeah, and it was then a 3 year course. I graduated with a BA in economics. And originally, I thought that I was going to continue, get a master's, and then get a PhD because what I wanted to do long term was to just teach economics because I really was in love with it. But then after graduating, I got a chance to intern at a bank. So I thought, okay, I can do that for a while and then return to academia when I'm done with that. But after interning, I realized I actually prefer proper work because, and you guys are in university now and soon you'll be starting work, so you'll see that. But personally, my experience has been in academia, you don't get the same, let's say, experience, actual life experience, actual like learning on your feet that you get when you work an actual job. Because in academia, all of it is theoretical. You have a theory. You have a theory that if interest rates behave in a certain way, then the economy should behave in a certain way, and that's it. But you graduate, you start work, and you realize actually it's not like that. And my experience has been that economics is more, and finance, I guess, it's more like someone studying medicine. Okay, so you are equipped with diagnosing problems in the economy and how to deal with it, but no one tells you what the actual problem is or the actual disease. So you start work, you see different variables, different things happening, and you have to try to isolate what the problem is. And yeah, I digressed a bit, but I finished economics, and then that's where I started my career. I don't know if you want to know more about my actual education or.
Yeah, so I mean, we'll jump straight into that actually. So I wanted to ask, when you actually started your economics degree, you said you had the sort of plans to go into like a master's or PhD, but was there specificities about your degree that kind of made you not pursue that? As well as you said, you wanted to intern at a bank, but was the degree what you expected? Was it the economics you were learning? Was it what you had hoped for, or was it something different about it?
Yeah, so I really enjoyed the degree itself. I really enjoyed what we were taught because it was from a good university, so it was quite rigorous. But what you actually learn, so when I started economics, my idea was I wanted to. It was around the time where the euro crisis had occurred, and I wanted to get to a point where I could listen to economic news, understand it, analyze it, and then make predictions, effortlessly understand what's happening. And I didn't feel like I was getting that in university. It was mostly just theoretical, This is what macroeconomics is, this is what microeconomics, this is how the financial markets work. But there was nothing to just piece them all together. So I think that was one of the main reasons why, when I finished university, I thought, okay, I want to do some actual work because I feel like I know a lot. I feel like I understand the theory, but in practice, if you ask me to go and yeah, if you give me money and you ask me to invest in a portfolio, I don't really know what to actually do. If you ask me like what's going to happen with the economy or how are the things that were happening in Lebanon at the time gonna affect the economy 5 years from now, didn't really have the skill set to do that. And in hindsight, I mean, that's a lot to try to expect to be able to do. When you're in a career in finance or economics, it's going to be years and years and years of you adding knowledge and then adding experiences to be able to sometimes get it right, not even all the times. Um, but at the time, that's why I thought, you know what, maybe I need to get some work experience. And yeah, I started working. And as soon as I started working, I thought, actually, I enjoy this a bit more than academia because the stress was a bit higher. And I enjoy an environment where, you're pushed to actually do more. Whereas in academia, it was a bit too cozy for me. But the courses themselves was really nice. I mean, the thing that I enjoyed the most was the history of economic thought, so the philosophical side of economics, all the schools of thought, like Marxism, Keynesianism, Austrian school. Um, so it was a good experience, but I think I definitely enjoyed actually working more.
Yeah, I mean, I believe like that's the reality for most people. That if you ask them what does it say in a textbook compared to what they do in real life, they're like, we have no like knowledge of what we actually need to do. Like you mentioned, if you previously were told, what, well, invest in a portfolio, you wouldn't really know what to do. I think with experience, like I've always said, first-hand experience is invaluable.
Oh
Like,
yeah,
you can't
100%.
beat it. I mean, as you've proven, like you prefer the work environment. That's where you learn. Where it was also where you make mistakes, but it's where you learn. I feel like especially in the environment with banks and things like that, they're kind of more open to apprenticeships and working on the job and learning on the job, because once you've done the theory, there's only so much that you can
There's only so much you can know without
yeah,
experience,
exactly,
right? Yeah,
exactly. Some things you can't teach.
exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, but moving on from that, So I know you've mentioned like previously you wanted to, it was either a philosophy or, English or finance and English, whatever the split was. But when you were younger, what did you want to be? Do you think that that had an influence of what you are now?
Yeah. It's a good question. I mean, I think everyone is different, but for me, there was never a this is what I want to be, when I was five, or six or 10 or whatever. I never knew that what I wanted to do is what I want to do now. I think there is this maybe push that you need to be, I don't know, dreaming about being an engineer or a doctor or whatever at the age of 6, and all your life is leading up to it. Whereas my experience has been, you go through phases where you like different things and you try different things, and eventually you get to a point where you think, okay, this is something that I really like and I want to pursue. And I think there's another element of it which maybe is not discussed as much, and we'll discuss it more when it comes to my choice in career. But there's also this external world that you're dealing with that is gonna sometimes be not what you want or what you expect, Um, because it's a combination of both. It's what you like, and then it's what the world offers you. And then you have to take what the world offers you and work with it. Yeah, so when I was young, I didn't really have a specific inclination. I mean, again, as I said, at one point I wanted to be in medicine. I was really interested in that and in the sciences. At one point, I wanted to be a writer, but it was only in, I'd say, last year of high school that I really thought about economics, knew that I really liked it, and thought, okay, I want to do this as a career.
Great, yeah. I mean, I think that shows to never be afraid to change your goals. I mean, you said writer and and
Yeah,
whatnot.
and like it's good to experiment to see what like you said
Yeah,
what you enjoy and what you don't enjoy.
especially
'Cause-
when you're younger,
yeah.
because there's a lot of variables that can change very quickly.
Hmm.
So I think as you said yourself, that's a great overview of kind of your education, and I really want to jump into your kind of your choice of career and your start in finance as a whole now. So you mentioned your first sort of experience of the finance sector was interning at a bank. How did that come about for you, and what do you love and hate about it the most?
Yeah, so again, a lot of this is going to be very different because it's coming from Lebanon. But in Lebanon, especially at the time, it was a very competitive and small economy. So in London, you've got the second biggest financial market in the world, which is really a blessing for people who want to pursue a career in finance in the UK. But in Lebanon, it was a very small economy. Banking sector was the only thing that really existed. So whenever you got an opportunity, you had to just take it. And I had applied for an internship right after. Well, when I was in my school years. Yeah, sorry, I'll go back. So when I was in university, I had an internship at the central bank. So that was what I did during university. But then when I graduated, I applied for work, couldn't find work. The economy wasn't really doing well. So then I just took a random job while I kept applying. And within the first month of that happening, I got a response from a bank. It was actually the biggest bank in Lebanon at the time, and they weren't able to offer me a job, but they were able to offer me an internship, an unpaid internship, in their credit analysis department if I was interested. So I thought, you know what? Yeah, I'm gonna try and do that. I quit my paying job at the time to get that internship. And it was a 3 month internship, and after that, you might get a job or might not get a job.
I mean, that sounds. I know you said it's a bit different to how it is in the UK, but that sounds similar
Yeah,
to
it does. Yeah,
kind of
yeah.
what we do. We'll be applying to our main jobs, and as of right now, summer internships have already opened.
Don't
So
remind me.
yeah, we're literally applying for them, and yeah, it's just the experience you get, and it's the hopefulness of, oh, will they take me on as a graduate if I
Exactly.
do graduate,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
or will they offer me a placement year? It's kind of you got to like reach out for the stars in a sense. Like for us, we've got that luxury where, as you mentioned, the financial market's huge. There's so many areas you can go into: banking, asset management, insurance.
It's never ending.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's never ending. So we're quite lucky to have that. But it's also amazing that you've also you got the biggest bank for 3 months, and that's quite impressive achievement. But yeah, how has your view of the industry changed as a professional now? Is there things you wish you knew beforehand?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, this is a thing in finance as well. Finance is very like let's say boys club in a sense. There are some unwritten rules that you need to know, and if you don't have someone in your family or background who's in finance who could teach you that, then you don't know what the rules of the games you're playing are. And this is why it's really cool what you guys are doing, because you need to have this to speak to people in industry to try to get to a point where, okay, what can we do to actually understand how this thing works, because it's not really just about getting good grades, getting an internship, or that. There's a lot of moving parts. So a thing that I wish I knew back then is, one, to leave Lebanon to a country where there was a bigger financial sector. So that would have been the first thing that I would have done. And two, that you need to pursue certain types of internships depending on what you want to do long term. So you want to experiment with things early on. I mean, if you're interested in asset management, ideally you want to do that while you're in university, get an internship in that, see how it feels. If you want to go into investment banking, then that's also something very specific. Um, yeah, so I think in hindsight, that's something. If I had someone who told me how the game works, it would have been very helpful.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I'm glad you said that you kind of need a mixture of abilities and stuff. Yeah, I mean, almost in a sense, jack of all trades
Yeah.
in a way. I mean, that's what we always preach about, and all our guests preach about. Having a mixture of technical knowledge and hard skills, as well as being the ability to communicate and organize and soft skills.
Yeah, I feel like a lot more companies are looking at your soft skills, and how you fit in with the work culture, because that's important, right? You're going to be chilling with these people for 8 to 10 hours a day.
Yeah.
You need to be able to get on with them. It's all good and well you being smart and things, but what happens when you need to talk to clients and your teamwork? There's a lot of things that involve communication, and it's a key skill that employers look for. For example, for when you do assessment center, they look at the way you communicate with people, because it's a vital skill you need to have in the finance sector.
100%, 100%, and we're learning that slowly but surely now as
Slowly
well.
but surely,
That's
yeah.
it. So, Mohammed, when you first did that internship, let's say when you first started it, or give me a second, some technical issue. One sec. I'll start that question again. Give me a second. Apologies. Yeah. Just be careful when you tap. Yeah, no worries. Where was I? Yeah. So, Mohammed, when you first started your internship, or when you were kind of halfway through, let's say, and you were kind of thinking and contemplating, yeah, finance is that sector for me, and credit analysis is that division for me, let's say, was there anything that was kind of holding you back slightly, or specifically making you a little bit hesitant about going into the industry? Maybe the work culture, or the work-life balance, or even the hours and the responsibilities?
Yeah, I mean, at first it was the hours, because even though credit analysis isn't, the work-life balance in credit analysis tends to be better than a lot of other parts of finance, but we still were working, I mean, regularly till 9 o'clock, I guess, every day in Lebanon. So it was a lot of hours, especially for the pay. I mean, when I started the internship, it was unpaid, and then even when I started the job, it wasn't really great pay in the start. So there was the hours, and there was also the, let's say, opaqueness of career progression, but that was more an issue in Lebanon specifically. But I enjoyed my first job. I mean, you learn a lot about banking when you work in credit analysis. You learn a lot about people as well, because you're dealing with a lot of clients from different backgrounds. So I think for me, and in the beginning as well, because you're younger, even though the hours are a bit annoying, it doesn't bother you as much, because uh, you could just work as hard as you want. And when you're in your early 20s, you guys will start discovering that gradually. But the more you get into your late 20s, I'm just 30 now. You start slowing down a bit. I mean, you could still give a lot, but the long hours that you are willing to put just changes a bit. So I think that was one element when I was starting. But there was really no doubt in my mind. I knew that I liked the industry. I liked what I did, and It was more just trying to get opportunities to do something a bit different than what I did. Because what I did specifically was covering. So I started with retail credit analysis, and then I did some SME and some corporate. And that was interesting, but I always liked the idea of covering financial institutions. But at the time where I was working, that wasn't really a possibility because you need a really, really big organization to be covering financial institutions. But the industry itself was interesting.
I like what you said about us, slowing down in like 10 years' time. We see that ourselves, but right now we don't have, responsibilities and things like
Yeah.
that. And we've got all the energy and
Yeah.
time in the world. We're willing to, make that sacrifice, short term versus long term. You put in the hours now, so later on, hopefully in your stage, you can kind of be able to slow down,
Yeah.
right? You can kind
That's
of
the
have
plan.
that luxury.
That's the
Yeah, that
plan.
is the plan, hopefully. But yeah, just want a bit more information about, your internship and where you actually moved on from there. So I know you mentioned you moved to London or the UK. What exactly was your career path from there?
Yes, so after I finished the internship at that bank, it was a 3 month internship. I was offered a job. There was a junior analyst there, credit analyst. I did that, and then I moved into senior analyst, and that was within 4 years of working for that bank. So by the time I left that bank and I left Lebanon, that was what I was doing. But it coincided with a one of the world's biggest financial meltdowns that happened in Lebanon, and that was while I was working in the banking sector. And it was a really like it was a wake up call, and it was also an interesting experience because you hear about financial meltdowns, you hear about bank failures, but it's different being, in a bank failure and seeing people queuing at banks, riots in the streets, your money no longer having any value, and it's stuck in the bank. Because what happened in Lebanon at the time is we had a really um, inefficient economic policy where the currency was pegged to the dollar, but the peg was being financed by people's transfers into the banking sector in Lebanon. So banks in Lebanon would offer high interest rates. A lot of expats, some foreigners would funnel dollars into the banking sector. Banks would swap those dollars with the central bank and the government would use that money to maintain the peg of the currency. And that went on for a few years, but a lot of things started gradually chipping away at the system. And in 2019, it completely collapsed. And then in 2020, the country defaulted on its sovereign debt. And 2020 was the last year of me working in the bank there.
Wow. I mean, we haven't experienced anything close to that. I mean, in our lives. I mean,
Yeah.
what, we were 3 when the GFC happened. I mean, not to make you feel old at all, Mohammed, but we haven't really experienced that sort of new perspective. I mean, I bet if it happened when we're in the industry and something of that nature happened in like 10 years, it would give us a complete new perspective on it. And it must have given you and you like opened your eyes into like how volatile the finance industry is, if you get what I mean,
Yeah.
and how many things the finance industry relies on as well, and the economy relies on. Last question on your start in finance and working in Lebanon before we get into your current field more specifically. You've talked about it a little bit, but are there any key differences between working in finance in Lebanon and then working now in the UK?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think the biggest thing is the opportunities are a lot limited. So the reason that I went into credit analysis specifically wasn't that I liked credit analysis. It was that that was the only option that I had to start my career, and I grew to like it. It's something that I really enjoy. But you don't get the diversity of opportunities that you have in the UK, and I think it's the same for a lot of, I'd say, maybe less developed countries where you don't really have all of the options that you have in the UK. So that's a difference. Um, yeah, I'd say that's the main difference. You don't really have all these options. I mean, certain industries completely in these countries don't even exist. For example, there's no actual stock market in Lebanon. because they tried to shield themselves from the financial crisis, the global financial crisis, and at the same time, the actual infrastructure wasn't developed enough. So imagine working in finance in a country where you don't really have a stock market. Uh, so it's different, but at the same time, same principles are there. Um, People get greedy, financial crises happen, everything collapses. There's too much exuberance and confidence. So it's similar in a sense, if you know what I mean. Like, you see the same cycles, you see the same speculative bubbles that you see everywhere else. But yeah, and this is something great for people like you, in that if you're in the UK, you've got a lot more opportunity. I mean, it's one of the best places to be if you're in finance, and you should really take advantage of that.
Yeah, I'm glad, I'm hopeful now, we've got more opportunities. Not trying to like brag or anything, but it's quite comforting knowing, it's a
Yeah.
lot easier than what it could be. That's the thing. But yeah, for someone wanting to get into credit analysis, what's important things they should know about the field? I know, obviously, as you mentioned, you didn't choose to be in credit analysis, but if somebody was wanting to, what would be the most important thing?
Yeah, I mean, the starting point, I guess, is having really good knowledge of the sectors that you're covering. If you're covering corporates, if you're covering financial institutions, you need to really understand the sector that you're covering. And a lot of that comes with also really good technical skills. So, financial analysis, the ability to project earnings, for example, build models, forecast, all of that actual technical skills. But you also have to have a certain intuition, because in credit analysis, you're trying to think of where things could go wrong. So it's a bit different to equity analysis, I say, because in equity analysis, you're thinking also of where things could go wrong, but you're focused more on the plus side. How could this increase in value? How much could this investment be worth? Whereas in credit analysis, your main interest is, will I get back timely repayments of my loan, of the debt? So having this intuition when things are going wrong is also very important. And then a final thing I would say is, similar to other areas of finance, you need to have good people skills, because you're speaking with clients, you're speaking with the people that you're lending to, if you're working, for example, underwriting in a bank. Um, and it's good to have personal skills, actual social skills when you're doing that.
Yeah, I mean, credit analysis for me wasn't exactly. I mean, I was aware of it as a, especially Fitch Ratings and other similar firms, but I wasn't aware of the, how the nuances of it, as you've just explained, and this starting to take my interest a lot more now. So I mean, and I hope for some of our listeners as well. But
Something we're gonna, research into after this episode, literally.
100%, 100%. So you did your internship and then you got your first paying job in the field. How did you land your first job in credit analysis, and what do you think made you stand out from other applicants?
Yeah, so when I got the internship, so when you start work, you realize early on that even if you're, smart, even if you've got a good degree, effectively to any organization, you don't really have a lot of, let's say, economic worth. Like, the thing that you're going to be able to produce, which I didn't know that at the time. I had different expectations. But the thing that you're able to actually give to an organization when you're a fresh graduate is going to be quite low. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just because it takes time for you to actually start providing value. So when you're in that stage, what you can show and provide is enthusiasm. You have to put in the hours, you have to be willing to take on extra work. um, Later in your career, if you want to dial it back and you want to be selective and you want to say, okay, yeah, I'm happy to do that. Actually, I'm not that comfortable doing this. It's not really my job. I mean, you could have a more balanced approach, because you're actually providing value. But when you're starting, you just need to show the organization that you could be there first thing in the morning. You could leave last person at night, and hopefully, if you do that often enough, you're going to get lucky and they're going to hire you. So that's exactly what I did. I would just ask for more work, try to be there as early as I could, leave, be among the last people who left. And the managers at the time saw that, and they, saw potential, and they offered me a job.
Yeah. I mean, it's a key characteristic to show that you're driven. Even with these personality tests, there's so much information they can derive, and they kind of shortlist you by checking, like, your personality, does it fit in? Are you driven? With even like all these extra things, like as I mentioned, assessments, and that's why it's so vigorous, because they want to have you, like you mentioned, you got not much to offer, but if your enthusiasm, it takes a lot of effort to apply to a bank or a firm with four different assessment processes. Like, it's four different stages, and even that in itself shows that you're committed to the role. That writing a cover letter for each and every one, and maintaining that is part of it, like you mentioned, every day doing it, and that's what puts you in the positions that you are in today.
Yeah, I mean, I was speaking to some professionals. They always say to me that if you have the soft skill package, and if you can show it to an employer, even if you've got not the best of grades, no experience, and you've just come straight out of university, if they can see, as you said, eager, driven, determination, ability to communicate and stuff like that, then hard skills can always be taught. You know what I mean? It's as we started off the episode talking about, textbook theory and stuff like that. That stuff can always be taught. Yeah, it's harder to do so later in your career, but it can always be taught. But soft skills are hard to develop if you're not in the field.
I mean, it might sound cliche to the listeners, but we've spoken to hundreds of professionals. I'll say hundreds. Tens of professionals, yeah. And they will say the same thing, the drive, the determination. Like, that's what gets you, never giving up. That it's all about that, showing that you're willing to put in the hours, as you mentioned, last person to leave, first person in the morning, and those things, carry
pay
on.
Off. Yeah,
they do pay off in the long run. But yeah, touching on all of this, if you were to go back in time, what would you change, and what would you do differently?
So I would probably move to London to start my career there. I wouldn't start my career in Lebanon. That's the thing. I might have gotten a CFA as well. I mean, it's something that if you get early on, you've got more time to do it, and it's always beneficial. So I think these two things mainly. But whenever you do something, you think, oh, okay, I wish I could have done this differently. I wish I could have done that differently. But in hindsight, I mean, the fact that I was in Lebanon when the banking sector collapsed, it's something that gives you a really different perspective, and I don't think I'd swap that for anything, because you see what you read about in textbooks. So yeah, I think as long as you are willing to keep working and keep adapting, yeah, you might think maybe I should have done this differently, but in the end you arrive at a place where you're happy, and I think that's what matters the most.
Couldn't agree more. I think whenever we ask, the professional guest, what would you go back and change? They never say they change anything, or they'll say they change very little, because I think there's a sense of you've got to be grateful for where you are now, in a way, and grateful for the journey.
Yeah, I guess there's a sense of, without those mistakes, they wouldn't be who they are today.
Yes,
It's those, like, mistakes, same mistakes, but those experiences that make you who you are. Like you've mentioned, like, you were in that, what you read about, you were in it. And then, like, that's transferred.
Yeah, those black swan events. Like,
exactly.
you never expect to be in it until you never know. I think the famous quote is, "You never know you're in a black swan event until it actually happens to you." But on to what we really wanted to talk about the most in this episode: your current role and everything surrounding it. So you, as I said at the top of the episode, you're an associate director at Fitch Ratings, a senior role. So what's the purpose of your work, in your own words?
Yeah, so I mean, what I do currently is I cover a portfolio of banks. These banks are mainly in the GCC region, but I also cover some banks, for example, in Turkey, and some banks in the UK. And it's everything to do with handling the ratings of these banks. So I don't know if you guys know exactly what rating agencies do, but you've got a lot of rating agencies, but you have three very large rating agencies which tend to have the biggest market share. So you've got Moody's, S&P, and Fitch, and there are ratings for different types of obligors. You've got ratings for corporates, you've got country ratings. For example, when I was in Lebanon, something that I was keeping close eye on was the actual sovereign rating, because as a country approaches default, you see the sovereign rating starts to decline until it's an actual default. And you've got banks as well, so you've got ratings for banks, and the ratings are Fitch's opinions, or their opinions of the rating agencies on the relative credit worthiness. So this is basically what credit ratings is. It's credit analysis that produces a scale of ratings that designate, the credit worthiness of these obligors. So currently, what I do is there's a portfolio of banks that I cover, and it involves everything from rating these banks, rating the debt that they issue, producing research paper on banks and on these sectors as well. So I think that, in a nutshell, is what I do.
That's a good consolidation for myself as well of the ratings and things like that, and it's a nice overview that you've just given us. But if you don't mind, I kind of want to talk about the structure of your day. Is it like is it routine, or is it random, or just walk us through your structure if you don't mind?
Yeah, so it would depend on what banks I'm working on at the moment, because it tends to be a portfolio of banks, and they have different review dates, review cycles. So it would depend if I'm during a cycle where I'm actually drafting and working on a bank. We also travel a lot to the countries where these banks are based to meet with management. So it could be also that I'd be traveling. Um, but I say day to day, it's a lot of Excel. It's a lot of research, researching what's happening with the banks that I cover, and then maybe let's say like 50% of it is looking at financial statements, because that's the bread and butter of what you're doing.
Hmm. Yeah. Traveling as well is, I mean, do you see that as a benefit, or as a con sometimes, or does it change sometimes? I mean, depending on like if you have to travel every other day or something. But do you like, especially when you first started, do you like traveling as part of your role?
Yeah, I actually quite enjoy it. I mean, it's nice because you get to immerse yourself in different cultures from the economic side of it. So the more that you travel and you get to understand how the economy works, you're also understanding, what people are facing day to day. Yeah, I think it's an advantage of the role I'm in. I mean, every person is different, but personally, I really enjoy it.
I mean, that's a huge bonus. You're going on all these nice trips. I say nice trips, but there's elements of that you can enjoy. I know you're going for work purposes and things, but I think that's one of the key points of your job. Like, you can actually enjoy bits of it while you're working, and that's what makes you more
Willing to work.
willing to
Yeah.
work. Yeah, exactly. So, what project have you worked on that you're most proud of? That's kind of one key question.
Project that I worked on. There are, so I have to be very careful here because there are things that I can't disclose, obviously.
Okay.
Yeah, of
Yeah.
course.
Um,
Yeah, of course.
but I'd say there were a few, let's say, sector reports that were published that I'm quite proud of. But I'm also just proud of let's say, the journey that got me here, because there was a lot of having to, do certain examinations, jump through hoops, do all that. So yeah, when you are in a role where you're enjoying what you're doing and you reflect back on your journey, I think it's a very important thing to be happy about what you're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
100%.
Just out of general curiosity, has popped into my head. Do you still have to, focus on your exams? Is there examination, standard that you have to, every year, for example?
No, there are no specific like regulatory exams that you have to do while you're at rating agencies. There are obviously trainings related to where I work specifically, but there's that element.
Okay. Yeah. Good question.
It's a
Because
good thing to
we
know,
never
just
asked
out of
about that.
curiosity.
Yeah.
Because some people I know with like accountancy, there's a consistent, every yearly regulation where you actually have to meet the
Oh, okay.
criteria.
Okay. Well, yeah, that's really interesting to know. I wanted to ask. Obviously, every job has its pros and cons, and every job, as you said, every person is different, each to their own, etc., etc. But for you, what types of challenges do you have or have experienced at work, and what's your best way of overcoming them?
I mean, I think in our line of work, one of the difficulties is the responsibilities that you have, because it's very important that you don't mess up, especially when it comes to the regulatory side of it. So that could put a lot of pressure on you because, it's not like you can't make mistakes. Obviously, there are always, processes in place if you do. But my line of work, it's very important to have the confidence of the market, if you know what I mean. So it's very important to be strict in following compliance procedures, in not making certain mistakes in certain areas. So that puts a lot of pressure. And the way that I've had to deal with it is just to dial back and take my time, because when you're working in banking, when you start your career in banking, banking is very fast paced. You're done with one project, you move on to the next. You're done with one deal, you move on to the next. But in this line of work, you really have to put everything down. Have a drink of water, sit down, and really reflect and take your time to make sure that everything you're doing is correct.
I mean, you've mentioned pressure. Do you see your job as, a highly pressure job? I mean, how do you deal with that pressure? I mean, like you said, you take a sip of, water, take a step back. But in your current role, how would you advise people to, de-stress?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I found gym. That's what I used to de-stress. I think if you're working in finance, you're gonna be stressed, and my experience has been that people either choose something that is like destructive long term, or it's something that is going to be constructive. You cannot not face stress. You have to find a way to unwind. And it could either be, running, gym, sports, some sort of, or music or something like that, or it could be something destructive. But you have to be aware that if you don't manage your stress, you're not going to be able to last in this industry for a long time.
I
Yeah.
mean, I love that. Like, it's either going to be constructive or destructive. I've never heard that perspective. Like you mentioned, gym. You construct yourself, build yourself. So it's a good way of looking at it. When you see people that are stressed out, it's a good bit of advice to pass on.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. It's very sound advice.
Yeah.
Especially to people like us who are still planning on getting into the industry and maybe not faced stress
Yeah.
like that
If we
before.
can build those habits now, it'll only benefit us in the future.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
A key question now: what makes you stay in this role? Now, you could answer that from like the perspective of being an associate director, or staying in the industry of credit analysis as well. What makes you stay?
So I think when you're in a role where you're still learning and you are still interested and curious about what you're doing, that is for me what makes me stay in a role, or what keeps me in a role long term. And what I do now, there's always, because you're covering banks, it's something quite huge, quite macro. So there's always different elements, different aspects, and different things to look at that will always constantly keep you curious and keep you motivated. So you could be looking at changes in the wider economy and how they're affecting a bank one day. Then you could be looking at the capital structure of a bank, its asset quality another day. You could be looking at, liquidity. So there are always things that could keep you curious. And I think when you're doing something long term, you have to enjoy it. I mean, it's not always going to be fun. You're going to get things that are going to be admin or boring or, repetitive, but you need to enjoy most of it, or else, you're going to burn out very quickly.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, we've seen like with professionals, you see they often, change careers like because they can't handle the stress and they can't, they don't enjoy it. Some people are only there to chase money, for example, or, status and things like that. And that's not, there's a reason why you can't last. You have to be built differently to, for this, not to like to our own horns or anything. But there's actually like a key characteristic. But yeah, just touching on, the final bit of the episode. Just one last question about your current role. How does your job change over the year? Does it get more busy during periods? I mean, like when companies release their financial statements, I'm guessing you guys, I'm not sure how it works. So just give us an insight to, busy periods and how it works.
Yeah, so as you said, exactly. I mean, when financials are published, it tends to be busier. And then it tends to be, I guess, a bit less busy around Christmas because not a lot of the reviews occur at that time. So I'd say it's consistent, but you get a few periods where, like Christmas, where it's a bit less busy, and then I'd say maybe day to day. I mean, the hours aren't again as intense as what you see in investment banking, so you get a pretty decent work life balance. But let's say maybe once a month, twice a month, or something like that, you have to put in quite long hours to if there's something time sensitive you're working on. But yeah, overall, I'd say it's just consistent. Yeah.
Yeah. I actually just thought of a last question. As I said, this is the question, the segment I'm most excited about. I wanted to ask, how much autonomy do you have in your day to day? I mean, are you expected to follow instructions from kind of like your manager or whoever it may be, or do you kind of create your own approach to the day and figure out what sort of results you want to achieve?
Yeah, I think I'm fortunate that my manager doesn't micromanage me, and there is you have roles and you have deadlines that you have to meet. But as long as you keep them in the loop, you've got a lot of autonomy on what you're doing during the day or how you're arriving at that.
I mean, that's always good to hear. You're not being micromanaged. I don't think anyone likes being micromanaged. It's always nice to know. But yeah, that was a lovely, overview of, your current role and your intro into finance. Just want to touch on our last segment, which is future into finance. So, what's next for you in your career? Where do you see yourself in 5 years' time? Do you see yourself sticking with, credit analysis, or you're open to changing roles?
Yeah, I mean, at the moment, I'm enjoying what I'm doing, and I think you get more responsibilities, and you get more and more senior in whatever you're doing. So at the moment, I don't think I would be, let's say, not covering financial institutions in the future, and this ties back to the time I was in Lebanon. When I was in Lebanon, um, and seeing the financial collapse, I realized how important banks were to everyday people. If you can't get your money out of the bank, I mean, there's nothing you can do. So that made me really, really interested to see how banks work, how banks operate, what makes a bank fail, what makes a bank continue. So because of that, I think I'd probably still be covering financial institutions because it's something that I discovered I really like.
Well, that's great to hear. I mean, it's great to hear that you enjoy your job. I mean, sometimes you can kind of sense that when you're speaking to an employee of somewhere and they say they enjoy their job, but when you look into those eyes, you can see that they don't really enjoy the job. So, I mean, what you've been speaking about, I mean, really does let our viewers know as well that enjoyment in finance is possible. It's not all about stress and pros and cons, etc. So last question for this episode and last question to you. Our viewers, range from, GCSE and sixth form students who are not really sure where they're going to go in future, and university students like us, who are sure they want to go into finance but aren't too sure on what division they want to go into. So any final tips you'd like to give to our viewers and listeners who might be at that stage of deciding what division they want to go into, or still thinking about if they even want to go into finance at all?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say experiment as much as you can, especially when you're in university. Try to get to shadow people if possible. Try to get internships. Try to speak to people in the industry because you want to gather as much information to see what career will probably be best for you. I'd say the second piece of advice that I'd give is don't be too hard on yourself. I mean, even if you do everything perfectly, you could still get to a point where you get to a job and realize after a month you don't really like it that much. And when you're in your 20s, you could afford to make mistakes. You could start at a career, change completely the major that you're in. So don't be too hard on yourself. And the third thing I would say is if you figure out that you do love finance and you do want to be in finance, anything that you put sufficient effort in will lead to a successful, well paying aspect of finance. So, what I mean is, if you're in asset management, if you're in investment banking, if you're in corporate finance, if you're in any area, even the areas that maybe aren't as, let's say, like luxurious or you hear about them, anything in finance, if you really put in the effort and excel in, will get you to a point where that career is yielding you good income and it's also interesting. So don't just think, oh, it's just 3 or 4 specific careers that I have to get, or it's over. There's a lot out there.
I mean, you've just dropped like 3 brilliant
Yeah,
gems.
right at the end of the
Absolute
episode.
gems, saving the best for last. I agree and love everything you've said. I'm definitely going to rewatch this podcast episode. Just to listen to your advice. You've been absolutely lovely guest.
Yeah, absolutely.
I do appreciate the knowledge that you've bestowed upon us.
Yeah, that's it. And for our viewers and listeners as well. Yeah, Mohamad, thank you so much for joining us on this episode. Yeah, no worries. Looking on to next week for our viewers and listeners, we're on to episode 25 somehow, which is pretty crazy to us. And it's time for our monthly recap. Again, we've got Dylan, our equities expert, and Jeremy, our crypto expert, joining us for another episode. A lot has happened in August, and so a lot to talk about there. And we'll see you again on the Monday. And if you're watching us on YouTube and that subscribe button is still red, then be sure to hit that so you don't miss any of our videos or any of our shorts as well, or any of our posts as well. And if you're listening to us on audio platforms, then follow us on there so you don't miss anything, and give us a rating, and be honest, we like the criticism, and drop a comment wherever you are as well. Our socials are in the links of all of our bios on all of our platforms, so be sure to head off over there, show us some engagement, show us some love. We've started posting a bit of different content, so we'd love to see your thoughts on that. But as always, thank you for listening, and as always, we'll see you in a week's time. Please do stay tuned. Thank you.